Have you ever felt like you're just stuck in a loop, repeating the exact same patterns over and over and over again? Well, today we are diving into this amazing piece of history from the Apostle Paul's very first recorded sermon. It's a story about an entire nation stuck in a devastating cycle for centuries, and the one dramatic moment it was finally broken. So let's dig in and see how it all went down. I mean, just imagine a whole nation's destiny playing out like a predictable script. You get a period of peace, right? But that's followed by this slow slide into chaos, then a desperate cry for help, a dramatic rescue, and then you're right back at the beginning. This wasn't just some theory. For ancient Israel, this was their reality, and it lasted for generations. We are talking about the era of the Judges. So picture this. This is the period right after the Israelites entered the promised land of Canaan. There was no king, no central government, just this loose confederation of tribes. And for 350 years, their entire history just moved in a circle. And this was the pattern that defined them. It all started out great, with peace and prosperity, but then, you know what happens? Complacency sets in. The people started taking all their blessings for granted. And that led right to the next step, where they kind of forgot the source of their peace and turned to other things. And that's when the trouble would start. Suffering came next, usually in the form of some brutal foreign invasion. Beaten down, totally desperate, they would finally repent and cry out for help. And in the final step, a rescuer, a judge, was sent to deliver them, which brought them right back to step one. Peace returned, and the whole cycle began all over again. So the crucial point here is understanding the root of this problem. And it's something so deeply human, right? Think about it. You wake up in the morning, and you just assume you'll be healthy. You eat a meal, and you just assume your body will digest it. When good things become routine, we stop being thankful. We start seeing them as things we're owed. For the Israelites, this attitude led them to forget God, thinking they could live perfectly fine on their own. And this wasn't just some brief phase. This cycle dominated their national story for 3.5 centuries. Can you even imagine that? The book of Judges records this exact pattern repeating 7 times, each time a painful lesson that they just seemingly couldn't learn. The sheer weight of that history is just, wow. And let's be really clear about what a judge was. The original Hebrew word isn't what we think of. We hear judge, we think of a black robe, a gavel, a courtroom, right? Forget all that. These were charismatic military leaders. They were deliverers, raised up by God for a very specific crisis. This was not a hereditary job. When the crisis was over, their authority usually just faded away. Power was decentralized, and their ultimate king was always meant to be God himself. After 350 years, you'd think this cycle was just permanent. This is just how things were. But then something snapped. The people grew tired of the loop, and they decided to demand something completely new, something that would change their nation forever. It was like a perfect storm was brewing. The last great judge, Samuel, he was getting old, and his sons, the guys who might have taken his place, they were corrupt and totally untrustworthy. At the same time, the Israelites are looking around at their neighbors. They see these other nations with kings with centralized armies, unified power, and they felt weak and fragmented by comparison. Their solution? We need to be like that. And their demand gets right to the heart of the whole issue. Give us a king. See, they didn't want another divinely appointed rescuer anymore. They wanted a human institution, a centralized power structure, just like the world around them. They wanted to trade that unpredictable cycle they were trapped in for a predictable man-made system. Now, this request created a deep theological crisis. God's response was essentially, "But I have been your king all along." By asking for a human king, the people weren't just making a political request. No, they were fundamentally rejecting God's direct rule over their nation. They were choosing a human system over a divine one. And the contrast between the two systems was just stark. The age of Judges was decentralized, it was reactive, and it was all based on this principle that God was the true king. A monarchy would be the complete opposite. Power would be centralized in one man, leadership would be proactive, and a human being would sit on the throne. This was a monumental shift in their very identity as a nation. So what happened? Well, in a really fascinating move, God granted their request. He allowed them to have the king they asked for, and in doing so, he steered their history in a new direction, but still within his ultimate plan. Their first king was Saul, and he was exactly what the people wanted. Tall, impressive, a real military leader. He was, through and through, the people's choice. But after him came King David, and this is the key distinction Paul makes in his sermon. David wasn't the people's pick. He was God's choice. This is how God described David. He wasn't just another ruler. He was someone whose heart was aligned with God's purposes. And through David, God was going to establish a royal line that would be central to the rest of the story. So the breaking of that 350-year cycle, that wasn't the end in itself. It was just setting the stage for something far, far greater. So why? Why did the Apostle Paul walk his audience through this entire 400-year history lesson? From the chaotic cycle of the judges all the way to the demand for a king, he was building to one single crucial point. The big takeaway is this: none of it, the cycle, the suffering, the kings, none of it was the main story. It was all a prologue. It was just the setup for the real message he was about to deliver. Paul's purpose was really threefold. First, to show that God was guiding Israel's history, even through all their failures. Second, to reframe their history. Their demand for a king, which seemed like a rejection of God, was ultimately used by God to establish David's royal line. And third, and this is the most important part, to declare that this entire story points to the arrival of the true, perfect king from David's lineage, Jesus Christ. And that leaves us with a challenging question for ourselves, doesn't it? The Israelites chose a human king for security and, well, to be like everyone else. It forces us to ask, what kings, what systems, what people, what ambitions do we put on the throne of our own lives, hoping they'll finally be the thing that breaks the cycles we're stuck in?